Okay, hi everybody. So today we are going to be talking about botulism. Now, if you remember the last time we met, I was talking about tetanus. Botulism is kind of the opposite. So let's go ahead and take a look at botulism. And first of all, like tetanus, botulism is also caused by a Clostridium bacteria. So it's caused by Clostridium. And in this case, it's going to be called Clostridium botulism. Okay. And this is a U right here, not an A. So let me go like that. Okay. So here's the thing about Clostridium that we already know is, for the most part, Clostridiums are anaerobic, which means they die if there's oxygen around. Okay. And they're also bacillus. So they are rod shaped. Okay, so there's my Clostridium right there. All right, so they're going to be rod shaped. Now, here's the thing about botulism. Is because there's a lot of oxygen in our air, there's two places that can be found, that botulism can be found. One of them is in aquatic sediments. So if you go to a lake or if you go to a pond sometimes, what you'll find is it's in the sand underneath the water. So it's in aquatic sediments. The other place that's common too is in the soil. So here's what happens. If you notice, and this may be a little bit hard to see, but I actually have some Clostridium right here. All right, so this is already in a spore. But what happens is it's in soil. So this is my soil right here. And let's say somebody comes along and they start digging up the soil. Let's say they're pulling up food or something. They're pulling up something to eat, right? Some type of vegetation or vegetable that you eat. And they dig in here, and now oxygen can get down to where my bacteria is, where my Clostridium is. Okay? What it will do is it will form an endospore. So these are bacteria, these are the Clostridium right here in endospores. So basically, botulism forms endospores. And for lack of a better way of describing it, or the easiest way to describe it, an endospore would be like making a seed that's around a shell that's around a seed. Okay, so that's what's going to happen here. Now let's say we happen to be picking beets, and what happens is the Clostridium, we put the beets into a can, and then what happens is we vacuum pack that can. When you vacuum pack something, you pull all the oxygen out. So this is actually a really good environment for botulism to live in. And here's my botulism. Those are still the spores right there. Well, now that there's no longer any oxygen in there, what's going to happen is the botulism is going to break out of the spores. So now here's my botulism here. It's broken out. And it's going to start to release a toxin, the botulism toxin. So it's going to release the botulism toxin. All right, see that? But at the same time, what it's going to do is it's going to break down any sugars that are inside this can. By the way, it doesn't have to be beets. It can be several different types of food. And the ones that it's not, I'll explain in a minute. But it's going to start breaking down sugars. Well, it breaks those sugars down into basically carbon dioxide and hydrogen. And what's going to happen now is these are going to be gases, right? So this is hydrogen gas, and carbon dioxide is always a gas. I guess hydrogen's always a gas too. So what this will do is this will actually start to put out an odor too. So it will actually start to smell. As it puts out the gases, what's going to happen is the gas is going to expand so much that it's going to break down that vacuum pack. So eventually what's going to happen is, instead of the top being a nice seal, it will actually bubble up. And you've probably seen this before. If you go to the store and you've seen cans where the seal has been broken, they say don't buy that because of botulism. Well, that's what's happened, is the botulism has managed to not only produce its endotoxin. Oops, all right, so this is an endotoxin. So it's not only produced an endotoxin, but it's also produced other gases that are going to break that seal. So now, what kind of foods do not get botulism? Normally, things that are highly acidic will not get botulism. So here's a can of pickles, right? And for the most part, they're highly acidic. All right? Usually in class, when I ask people to name a highly acidic food, they'll say lemons, but they also say oranges. So here's the thing, is oranges are highly acidic, but the difference with oranges is they can actually get botulism, because what can happen is I can get mold on the oranges. So I get mold, and the mold is going to decrease the pH of the orange. It's going to increase the pH of the orange, which makes it more basic. So we get an increase in pH. So it's a decrease in acidity. All right, and now botulism can actually grow on that. Okay, so what we've done basically to prevent foods from getting botulism also is, and you'll find these on foods like hot dogs. So here's, I know this isn't a good drawing, but this is a hot dog. And so what they've started to do to foods too is they've actually started to add a salt, which we call nitrates. And so they'll put that into foods, and what that will do is that will actually stop botulism from growing in those foods. So let's say now somebody comes along and they eat this. So this person eats this now, and the botulism, along with the toxin and the carbon dioxide and the gases and stuff. Let's say it's not smelling yet, and you haven't noticed this is pop, but I do have endotoxin in there. So now it gets inside a person. Well, for the most part, once it's inside a person, this is by botulism here, it gets into the intestines. But if you're an adult, so let me write down that this is an adult intestine here. If you're an adult, what happens is there's already a lot of other microbes in there. So this is kind of like the new guy in the neighborhood trying to take over the neighborhood. But we already have a lot of microbes in our intestines. So here's some microbes, right? And then here's some microbes. And here's some microbes. All right, and so there's all these microbes. So now my botulism really can't compete with all these other microbes. So what happens is it usually does not cause problems in an adult. So due to competing microbes, botulism is usually not a problem in an adult. Okay? Now, what about in babies? So here's the thing, is babies don't have the same amount of microbes as an adult has in their intestines. So now this comes along, and because there's not a lot of microbes, this can start to multiply and take over. Well, what's going to happen is, and we'll explain how this happens in just a minute, is this can now go out to my nerves, and it can cause the muscles not to contract, and the baby just becomes floppy. It can't contract its muscles. So we call this floppy baby syndrome. So first, let's say this is a baby. Let me see if I have, there's my pink marker, because we want to use pink for babies, right? I guess if it's a girl, I don't know. Pink looks more like a baby color than blue does. So anyways, what's going to happen now is this can lead to floppy baby syndrome. Okay, and unfortunately, floppy baby syndrome can actually be deadly. So where do babies get this from? What happens is, I'm going to draw a little can here, and that's the little spout that comes out of it. And let's go ahead and fill it in with this here. And what happens is that endospores from botulism can actually grow inside of honey. So this is why they say don't give babies honey, because it may have botulism in it. And then if the baby eats the botulism, they can get floppy baby syndrome. So it's always best not to give the babies honey. Okay. So what happens now that we've ingested this? Okay. What it's going to do is after it's done multiplying, it releases the endotoxin. It's going to go over to the nervous system. I'm going to move my camera over here just a little bit. Okay. And here's what's going to happen. This is a motor neuron. Okay, motor neuron means it's going to move muscle. I'm actually going to draw this a little bit bigger. Okay, and before I even draw that, there's something else I forgot to draw. So I'm going to draw this one kind of small because I'm not really too concerned about this. Okay, and then it's going to go out to my alpha motor neuron. So if you remember when we talked about tetanus, we called this here a Renshaw cell. And what Renshaw cells were responsible for was inhibiting my alpha motor neuron. Well, now I'm going to draw my alpha motor neuron. All right? And here's my axons here. Okay, so this is an alpha motor neuron. And what's supposed to happen now is when this fires, it makes the muscles contract. Okay, so now I'm going to draw my muscle here. And if you haven't seen the tetanus video, what happens, and this is the muscle, normally when this is contracting, this will inhibit it. So your muscles can relax after you've contracted them. So now, this is what I'm going to concentrate on here, is right in here. We're going to draw this. That may be a little hard to see, but all you have is that little black line that's going to form a synapse, a connection with the muscle. I'm going to draw that bigger right here. So I'm just going to take this here. And this is the ending of, on the end of this we have little like bulbs, which we call synaptic knobs or synaptic terminals. And this is going to be my synaptic terminal. Okay? And then this is supposed to connect over here to a muscle. Okay, so this is still my muscle. This is my synaptic terminal. And like I said, I've heard all sorts of things. I've heard them called presynaptic terminal. I've heard them called synaptic knob. In fact, synaptic knob is more common, so I'm going to put synaptic knob. All right, so that's right there. Inside of this, we have a neurotransmitter. Now, what neurotransmitters are responsible for doing is as my impulse comes down and it gets to here, which is here, the neurotransmitter will cross this little gap and carry the signal onto the muscle. Okay, and then it will make the muscle contract. When it comes to muscles, that neurotransmitter is called ACH, and it's going to be inside something called a vesicle. A vesicle is made up of the same thing as the cell membrane here. ACH stands for acetylcholine. Okay, so acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that's responsible for muscle contraction. Now, inside of this, the end of this, inside of this part here, we have something called snare proteins. So I'm just going to draw my snare proteins like this, and I'm going to draw them with little fingers that grab onto this. All right, and what the snare protein will do is as the impulse comes down and the electricity gets here, the snare proteins will actually pull the ACH so that this part here will bond with the cell membrane. It becomes a part of the cell membrane and releases the acetylcholine so it can go over to the muscle. So it would look something like this. After these pulled, here's what's left of my cell membrane, right? This would be my ACH particles that are crossing over to the muscle here. Once those bond with the muscle, the electrical impulse starts again, and then it's a whole process which we'll go into later in the year, and then the muscles will contract. Okay, so that's how botulism, or that's how it's supposed to work. What botulism does now, though, is it basically attacks these snare proteins. So again, these are the snare proteins. It attacks the snare proteins, so therefore, it can't pull the ACH over. So if this cannot go over to here, what happens is I cannot contract my muscle. And so the muscles just become weak and floppy. That's why you see over here, we call it floppy baby syndrome, right? So we have a problem with right there. Okay, and that's how botulism is going to cause the problem here. Now here's the thing also, is for the most part, if it affects some muscles, that's okay. But it also can affect the respiratory muscles. These are the muscles that are between your ribs. All right, and if it affects the respiratory muscles, you can't breathe. We call this, well, we call it shortness of breath. I'm just going to say can't breathe as it gets advanced. Okay? And then once you can't breathe, obviously what's going to happen is death is going to occur. Okay? So that's how the botulism is going to work. Now, there's different types of toxins with botulism. So I'm just going to pull this back over here. And I'm going to erase this. There's different types, okay? Botulism has basically A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and I've even seen some books that say it also has an H. We're only going to talk about 3 types here. So the first type of botulism is type A. Okay, basically type A is so deadly that just eating it will actually lead to death. Just a taste. Okay, this is proteolytic. And what we mean by proteolytic is it breaks down proteins. Now, if you remember what we said, or not what we said, but proteins can make up enzymes. So when I start breaking down proteins, I'm breaking down enzymes, which can lead to problems going wrong and death. There's type B. Okay, and in type B, basically this has been responsible for outbreaks in Europe and the eastern US. It may or may not be proteolytic. Okay, so it may or may not be proteolytic. Another type is type E. This is found in aquatic and marine environments. So found, I'm going to say in fresh water. Sediments. So usually in the sand of fresh water. All right, this is usually going to be found in fish. So people would get this from eating fish. The good thing about this one is if you boil it, if you boil your food, it actually breaks down the toxin and therefore it won't be deadly. But this is never proteolytic. Okay? So there's just 3 types of toxins. Let's talk a little bit more about this. Symptoms. The symptoms. So here's where botulism is going to affect. Is normally it starts off affecting cranial nerves. All right. So you have, if we go like this, you have your brainstem, and coming out of your brainstem you have cranial nerves. Right. These are cranial nerves. All right. And then back here you have your cerebellum. This is the big part of the brain. This is called the cerebrum. This is called the cerebellum. And then you have these cranial nerves. Some of those cranial nerves go to the eye. So what would happen with botulism is one of the first signs is double vision. Okay? As time goes on, this is usually if it's going to affect cranial nerves 3 4, or 6, simply because you can't move the eye. So people get cross-eyed. It can affect the 7th cranial nerve, which can cause facial paralysis. It may be difficult to close the eyelids. All right? And then it descends. Okay? Then it starts working its way down, and it starts to affect the other muscles of the body, such as the arms and the legs, and finally the respiratory muscles. Okay? So now, what are some uses for this? Well, some people know this already, and some don't. But basically, botulism is used in Botox. Okay? Botox is the cosmetic injection that you've probably heard of that helps with wrinkles. So here's some uses for it. Well, let me put wrinkles first, because we've already mentioned it. All right? It could help with hyperhidrosis. This actually may be a Y right here. Forgive me if I spelt that wrong. Hyperhidrosis. I'm going to put it back to an I. Okay, so this is excessive sweating. It can help with that. It can help with strabismus. Strabismus basically is being cross-eyed. And you may have seen people who are cross-eyed before, and one eye looks off to the side. So what they can do is actually go in and inject the muscles that are pulling the eye whichever way it's going, get those to relax, and then the eye will drift back more to where it should normally be. So that's strabismus. I'm going to put this cross-eyed. Okay. After strabismus, painful muscle spasms. Okay. It can help in any painful muscle spasms, but they also use it for painful muscle spasms in Parkinson's and MS, multiple sclerosis. Okay, and then Bleefer spasms. Bleefer spasms are basically eye twitches. It's usually of the eyelid. Okay, and it can also be used for headaches. If you have muscle spasms that are causing your headaches, they can actually do injections, and that would help with this too. So that's basically a quick rundown on botulism, and I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys soon.